All right, guys, today we have the Ruger RXM. Let's take a closer look. All right, so this gun has been on the market for about a couple months, so I'm sure you're all very familiar with it. Essentially, it's a Glock Gen 3 clone. Key difference is you have a removable fire control unit, or insert as they call it. Other differences are an improved trigger, raised steel night sights with the front tritium insert, and a multi-footprint optics gun. And so far, the reviews have been really good, but with everything, there's always going to be pros and cons, so let's get into it. So the first great thing about this gun is that it is obviously a collaboration with Magpul. And Magpul is no stranger to making great products. And there's a lot of things I do like about this grip module. Starting from the bottom of the grip, you can see they gave a very good magwell flaring, similar to what you find on a Glock Gen 5. The one improvement though is that they smoothed out the back of the inside, where on Glocks, normally there's a flat wall where the top round of a magazine can easily get caught, but here they definitely fixed that. The grip texture and grip shape are also phenomenal. It feels just like any of Magpul's AR-15 grips, and it really works well for the Glock platform. They obviously removed the hump as well that you typically find on Glocks, and this actually has the exact same grip angle as a 1911, so it's going to point very naturally for most people out there. Moving up a bit, the mag release button is also really well done. Same profile as a Glock Gen 3 mag release, but it is extended a little bit just to make it a little bit more easier to hit, but it's not too big to the point where it'll get bumped accidentally. They also did a really great job with the trigger guard. So you can see the joint is extended a little bit more out, unlike on Glocks. So when you go to grip it, your knuckle is not going to create any kind of uncomfortable pressure against that joint. You can see here they also cut out a little bit of material from the grip itself to really give your finger there a lot of room to rest. No double undercut, but I don't think that's really needed, honestly, at least for the majority of shooters out there. And also the trigger, as I mentioned, is definitely an improvement over Glocks, even right out of the box without any kind of breaking in. But I do think a good broken in Glock trigger is just fine. And it's going to be similar to what you have here, but this one's going to be just a little bit smoother, and you don't feel any of that Glock grittiness that you typically get. And you really get a good trigger pull that's just right and not too light for concealed carry or duty use. So I'll show you that trigger pull really quickly. It's a very smooth take up. You feel a little bit of resistance and the break is right there. It's extremely linear and predictable. Reset is pretty much the same place on a Glock, and it is just extremely buttery smooth. But again, it's not too light to the point where it'll create any kind of problems. Moving up, the optics cut is definitely an improvement over the Glock MOS design. This one is cut for the RMR, the Delta Point Pro, and RMSC pattern optics. Now, I'm not an optics guy when it comes to pistols, but for those of you who are, this cut is going to make this gun definitely one to consider. And more manufacturers are starting to include multi-footprint designs in their slides, and Ruger is definitely jumping on board with that. And with that being said, I also want to quickly comment on how much I do like these sights. They're extremely precise and really easy to acquire, and the height is also pretty nice as well. They're a little bit taller than the Glock sights. And also that height should make them work really well with any kind of optic you go with, giving you superb accuracy. Overall, this gun performed and shot extremely well. Like Glocks, at least for me, this one was extremely intuitive to shoot, whether one-handed or two, and you really won't have to think too hard when shooting this gun. In terms of accuracy, I was able to get extremely tight grooves at 25 yards right out of the box, which I think just really speaks a lot to the quality and the ergonomics. Reliability also seems really good on this gun. I've only had about 500 rounds through this one, but there's a lot of people online that have reported thousands of rounds through these guns. I think even without cleaning and not any kind of malfunctions at all. And on my end, there hasn't been any issues with reliability as well. The last thing I want to quickly reiterate on that I think is overlooked is that this is more or less a Magpul gun. You know, they have their logo on the frame and on the box. And I think what that means is that we're going to see a lot of great grip modules come out as aftermarket parts. And when you compare this gun to others with a chassis design like the P320 or the Springfield Echelon, I feel a lot more confident knowing that Magpul is the key provider for grip modules like this one. So those are the positives. As for the negatives, they'll be a little bit subjective, but the main one I want to touch upon is regarding the fire control insert design. So removal does require some time and tools and a few small parts. I'm not going to show you how to remove it, but there's some good videos on YouTube that show how. Basically, it's not as straightforward as the other kinds of chassis guns I mentioned, like the Echelon and P320, which can literally be swapped out in seconds without any tools. I think the main attraction to a fire control unit or insert design is that you can easily swap between like a carry configuration or a full-size range gun on a moment's notice. And, you know, if that's hard to do, then it kind of defeats the purpose, in my opinion. You might as well just buy a second gun in that case. But it's definitely a positive that it is removable, but I just really wish it was something that was a lot easier to do. And on that note, the other con is that the grip is not modular. So, you know, like most modern handguns, like Glocks, even like way back to 1911s, you can change your like things like the grip back straps or side panels, which is really helpful when you just need to kind of tweak the gun to fit your hand a little bit better. But similar with the 320, the P320, there's nothing you can really do to the grip except just like hope, you know, a new grip module comes to the market that fits you better. And as a SIG owner, I've definitely learned that these grip modules can quickly become a money sinkhole. So, you know, removable inserts are really cool, but I definitely advise that if you are going to look into buying this gun, just only buy it if this grip or any grip that it comes with in the future fits your hand. So I think the SIG grip modules, for example, run from like $50 to $70. I looked on the Magpul website and these run for about $40. So a little bit cheaper, but you know, if you buy like one or two of them, then quickly this is like, you know, another almost 80, 100 bucks that you're adding on to the original price of this gun. More on the grip. So I mentioned there's a lot of great things I like about this grip, but for me, it's not exactly optimal. Generally, I prefer an arc or a hump like on Glocks just because they really open up a lot more space for my left hand. And I actually do get a little bit of slide bite from this gun sometimes. And I think because there's not so much space for my left hand, so when I go for that grip, it ends up accidentally pushing my right hand thumb up just a little bit to the point where I get nipped. And that's actually despite the extended beaver tail they added there, which is not present on Glocks. And in my opinion, effective beaver tails really need to do more to protect the sides because that's where the bite actually happens. But you can see that the edges of the slide, they almost protrude past that beaver tail altogether. So the tail really doesn't do anything, honestly, except for just like poking you if you're carrying this, you know, appendix inside the waistband. Then, you know, besides that, there's not really much of a purpose. And that brings me to the topic of holsters. So in my opinion, I think the Glock is a little bit easier to draw from the holster. And I think the tail has a little bit to do with that. So in my experience, longer beaver tails just sort of block your thumb from getting around the slide, especially if you're carrying inside the waistband. And also, I think the grip texture, although I do like it, is just a little bit strong. So it's kind of harder when you go for that grip, it's kind of harder to adjust your fingers to the right spot during that draw. And I found out when I do draw this, I just don't really get that same kind of ideal grip like I do on a Glock. So I think Glock really found the sweet spot between, you know, being too little and too much traction for the grip. So it's probably going to vary, you know, between person to person, but that's just my experience. Also, this next point might be a little bit nitpicky, but, you know, for the grip texture, these patterns are a little bit harder to clean. They're kind of like on the P320, so I have some experience with these. But, you know, on a Glock, the grip texture is kind of like a grid, so it's really easy to go in with a brush and just kind of clean off the oil and like carbon from your hands to just get it kind of clean and dry again. But these, you know, it's really hard even with a brush to like get everything off really easily. So it takes a little bit more time to clean and kind of get polished when you're, maintaining this gun. In terms of other ergonomics, I think the other main difference is that the slide stop is a little bit more forward. It is definitely a great slide stop they added, but I noticed when I grip it, my left-hand thumb just kind of comes closer to it than on a Glock. Now, I thought maybe I would accidentally bump it sometimes and get premature slide lock, but luckily that never happened to me. But I'd say it is just something to consider. Now, my buddy, when he shoots it, he actually doesn't really get consistent slide lock for whatever reason, whereas on a Glock, that never happens with him. And, of course, adjusting the grip is always a solution. But, if you don't want to have to retrain a new grip for yourself, then it's just another thing to consider. Another point I want to make, which might be a little bit nitpicky, is that the slide serrations, again, they're very good, but they're almost a little bit too good. So they're a little bit sharp. So those press checks just kind of feel a little bit aggressive. And I think that's also might be another reason why the slide bite is more noticeable in this gun, because when I do get nipped there, I do really feel it, because I think these serrations are pretty sharp on both sides, both the top and the bottom, and the front and the back. The last minor cons I just want to point out is that the rail up here is not a 1913. So, the lights I have for my other guns, like my Glocks, they're not going to fit this one. I think this is basically just a Gen 3 Glock cutout. So shouldn't really be that big of a problem. But for me, I just kind of wish they, made it like a 1913 rail. The other thing, which is a bit of a bigger con for me, is that, of course, you're going to get the P mags instead of the Glock mags. And I have heard some reliability issues with these, just in general, not with this gun at all, but with other Glock clones, that once in a while these might cause hangups. I haven't experienced any issues with this, but just something to kind of take note of. The Glock mags, in my opinion, are going to be a lot nicer. These, of course, have the metal lining on the inside and obviously the round count indicators in the back. This one only has an indicator for when you're at, a full 15 rounds. Also, the base plate extends a lot more. I'm not really sure why they designed it that way, but when you go to load this and let's say you're carrying concealed, chances are it might print a little bit more, whereas these are going to fit a lot more flush. So if you are serious into getting like a Glock clone like this one, it might be worth it just to invest in some good Glock mags and sell off your P mags and get some money back. Those are really the only cons I've found with this gun. Of course, it's going to be very subjective at the end of the day. But the other last thing just I kind of want to point out is just an overall quality difference. Again, it's going to be very subjective. I had people shoot this gun and they say that Glock just feels a lot better quality. For me, I can kind of see it going both ways. There is a feel to Glock that for me just feels very nice. Whereas this one kind of feels just like a little bit different in nature. It's not bad, it's just different. The other thing I wanted to point out, just to kind of show you the build difference, that when I was taking this gun apart once, I actually ran into a weird issue. I was trying to remove the slide, and you have to pull the trigger to start that process. And at about this step, somehow the trigger moved forward on its own, and I'm not sure how to reproduce that, so I'll just pull the trigger manually, and the slide got stuck right about here, and it took me a second to realize what was going on. But I was basically stuck in this position. I couldn't move the slide forward or backward, and I thought maybe I broke the gun somehow. And then I realized eventually it was a trigger issue, so I just had to pull that back again, and the slide came off. And so I immediately tried that on my Glock to reproduce that issue, and I couldn't. So I'm not really sure why that is. It's probably something to do with the different internal design here with the removable chassis. But, it's just something to kind of think about in terms of the build difference and the quality difference. I mean, overall, again, it's everything here is really good. But, there are going to be some minor differences like that between a clone like this one and the original Glocks. So overall, this is a fantastic gun, but I wouldn't call it perfect. And I definitely wouldn't call it a Glock killer. But probably at least among the Glock clones, it is up there. I do like this more than Shadow Systems even, which is surprising just given how affordable these are. But for me, at the end of the day, I am going to prefer a Glock just for the slight ergonomic differences I've talked about. But I think for a lot of people, it is going to make a lot more sense to go with this over a Glock. I think this has brought something to the market that has been sorely needed for a long time. The way I like to think about it is basically the spirit of a P320 captured in a very affordable Glock package. So I will say, if you are looking for an affordable, a practical, and versatile 9mm, this is definitely one that you should consider. So that's going to be it for this review, guys. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.